Here's the brutal truth that Syracuse basketball fans don't want to hear. When your program hits rock bottom, desperate times call for desperate measures. And make no mistake about it. The Orange's 14-19 record last season, their worst showing since 1968-69, was absolutely rock bottom for a program that once dominated college basketball. But here's where it gets controversial. Syracuse just made the biggest roster gamble in program history by bringing in 6 transfer portal players, more than any recruiting class they've ever assembled. Some call it genius. Others are questioning whether this transfer-heavy approach is sustainable, or if it's just a band-aid on a deeper problem. With only J.J. Starling and freshman Donnie Freeman returning from last year's disaster, head coach Adrian Autry essentially rebuilt his entire roster through the portal. The question isn't whether these players have talent, it's whether throwing together 6 new faces can create the chemistry needed to compete in the brutal Atlantic Coast Conference. Let's break down this high-stakes roster reconstruction, and you can decide for yourself whether Autry is a mastermind or playing with fire. Naithan George represents everything Syracuse was missing at point guard last season, and frankly, it's embarrassing how long the program went without a legitimate floor general. The junior from Georgia Tech averaged 12.3 points, 4.2 rebounds, and a conference-leading 6.5 assists per game. Numbers that expose just how inadequate Syracuse's backcourt was previously. Unlike former starter Jaquan Carlos, who couldn't buy a bucket at 6.2 points per game, George brings legitimate scoring punch with his 33.9% three-point shooting on over 5 attempts per contest. But here's what should terrify opponents. His playmaking ability is elite. Those 6.5 assists per game ranked 11th nationally, and Syracuse hasn't had anyone eclipse 5 assists per game since John Gillen's 5.4 in 2016-17, nearly a decade ago. The most telling statistic about Syracuse's previous dysfunction? They went 1-10 against Power 4 opponents when Starling scored 16 or fewer points, and 2-5 when he was injured. That's not basketball. That's one-man dependence masquerading as a team sport. George's arrival should theoretically solve this problem, but will it? That remains the million-dollar question. Interestingly, George was unranked coming out of high school and had only one other major offer besides Syracuse. Either every other college coach missed badly on this evaluation, or there's something about his game that doesn't translate as well as his numbers suggest. Nate Kingz brings something Syracuse fans forgot existed: shooting efficiency that doesn't make you want to throw things at your television. The Oregon State transfer posted a ridiculous 131.1 offensive rating and 65.3% true shooting percentage, ranking 25th and 26th nationally respectively. His 44.6% three-point shooting on over 4 attempts per game is the kind of production that could single-handedly fix Syracuse's pathetic 32.8% team three-point percentage that ranked 240th in the country. To put King's shooting in perspective, if he maintains this efficiency at Syracuse, it would be the best three-point percentage by an Orange player with significant volume since C.J. Fair's 46.9% in 2012-13. That's over a decade of mediocre outside shooting that this one player could potentially cure. But here's the concerning part. Kingz doesn't shoot frequently, taking only 20.6% of available shots according to advanced metrics. Is this a player who's genuinely efficient, or someone who's simply selective to the point of being passive? Time will tell whether his low-volume approach translates when he's asked to be a primary offensive weapon. The 6'5", 190-pound guard also brings an interesting backstory, having legally changed his last name from Naithan to Kingz in May 2024 to start his own family legacy. Coming off an ACL injury that cost him the 2023-24 season, Kingz is betting on himself at Syracuse, and the Orange are betting their offensive revival on him. William Kyle III represents a philosophical shift that either shows brilliant adaptation or complete abandonment of Syracuse's traditional identity. Unlike last year's starting center, Eddie Lampkin Jr., who could score in bunches but was defensively limited, Kyle is all about protection and athleticism. Kyle's 9.0% block percentage and 3.8 defensive box plus-minus would have led Syracuse among rotation players last season, suggesting he could transform their interior defense overnight. At 6'9" and 230 pounds with a 7'3" wingspan and 44-inch vertical leap, he's built to be a defensive disruptor. But here's the elephant in the room. Kyle averaged just 2.9 points per game at UCLA. Can Syracuse afford to start a center who might struggle to reach double-figure scoring? This trade-off between offense and defense could determine whether the Orange compete for NCAA tournament consideration or watch from home again. Kyle's journey from Summit League Defensive Player of the Year at South Dakota State to struggling for minutes at UCLA raises questions about his ability to perform at the highest level consistently. His commitment to Syracuse came with bold promises about making an immediate impact. But college basketball is littered with transfers who talked big but delivered small. Tyler Betsey might be the most intriguing wild card in this entire transfer haul. The sophomore was rated as the 53rd best player in the 2024 recruiting class, making him a higher-rated prospect than anyone Syracuse typically lands these days. Yet, he managed just 3.3 points in 11.1 minutes per game at Cincinnati, barely seeing the floor in their final 8 games. This begs an uncomfortable question. If Betsey was so highly rated, but couldn't earn playing time at Cincinnati, what does that say about either his development or the evaluation process? His 35.7% field goal shooting and 32.1% three-point percentage suggest a player still searching for his college identity. At 6'8" and 225 pounds, Betsey has the size to play multiple forward positions, giving Autry lineup flexibility. But flexibility means nothing if the player can't produce when his number is called. Syracuse is essentially betting that a change of scenery will unlock potential that Cincinnati couldn't develop. Ibrahim Souare follows his former Georgia Tech teammate George to Syracuse, bringing another athletic big man option to complement Kyle. Like George, Souare was unranked out of high school and represents the type of developmental prospect that either blossoms into a key contributor or disappears into obscurity. A 6'9", 225-pound center from Guinea averaged 2.8 points and 3.6 rebounds in 17 minutes per game for the Yellow Jackets. His 42-inch vertical leap suggests elite athleticism, but college basketball success requires more than just jumping ability. Souare's role will likely depend on how quickly he can adapt to Syracuse's system and whether he can provide the energy and athleticism that Lampkin couldn't deliver last season. With only himself and Kyle as legitimate center options, Souare could find himself playing significant minutes by default rather than merit. Bryce Zephir completes this transfer collection as the ultimate journeyman, arriving at Syracuse as his 5th collegiate stop. The Montana State transfer brings experience and depth to a backcourt that will need both. But his 5.3 points and 2.1 assists per game suggest a player who's more organizational depth than impact contributor. At 6'4" and 200 pounds, Zephir has good size for a guard and brings left-handed shooting that could provide a different look. However, with freshmen Luke Fennell and Keon Anthony also competing for minutes, Zephir's playing time might depend more on injuries and foul trouble than actual performance. His nomadic college career raises questions about his ability to stick anywhere long-term, but it also demonstrates persistence and adaptability that could serve Syracuse well in challenging moments. And this is the part most people miss. This entire transfer portal strategy represents either brilliant roster construction or a desperate Hail Mary that could backfire spectacularly. Syracuse essentially decided that continuity and player development were less important than immediate talent infusion. The success or failure of this approach will determine not just Syracuse's 2025-26 season, but potentially the future direction of college basketball roster management. If it works, expect more programs to follow suit. If it fails, it could set Syracuse back even further. Here's the controversial truth that Syracuse fans need to confront. This transfer portal class is either going to save Adrian Autry's job or confirm that the program's problems run deeper than personnel. There's no middle ground when you bet this heavily on unproven chemistry and players running from previous situations. So what do you think? Is Syracuse's transfer portal gamble a stroke of genius that will restore the program to relevance, or a desperate move that shows how far the Orange have fallen? Are 6 transfers the solution to Syracuse's problems, or just 6 more variables in an already unstable equation? Let's hear your take. Are you buying into this roster revolution, or betting against it?